Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Greenberg. I am an Access Marshall Society leader here in beautiful Miami, Florida. Thank you so much for joining us here at this remote access program, Israel Unfiltered. My AJC journey started 3 years ago when I was selected to participate in the AJC Access Miami Shepherd Broad Fellowship, which concluded with a trip to AJC's incredible global forum. Over the past few years, I have fallen in love with AJC's vision for building a safer, more secure future for the Jewish people, Israel, and all of humanity. I'd like to thank Ali, Dana, and Alex, and all of the AJC Access professionals for giving me the opportunity to introduce today's program. Thank you all so much for your hard work that you put in every single day. Access is the young professional division of AJC Global, whose mission is to combat anti-Semitism, promote Israel's place in the world, and to promote democratic values. Now, let's introduce our panelists. First, we have Yael Mizrahi-Arnaud. She is a researcher at the Council on the Foreign Relations, focusing on the history of the Middle East peace process, Israeli politics, and Israeli relations with the Arab world. Previously, she worked as a senior research assistant at the Brookings Institution and a project manager at the Perez Center for Peace and Innovation. She holds a master's degree in international relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and has conducted research in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. Next up, we have Doreen Rosenblum. Doreen is the Assistant Director for the Government and Diplomatic Relations at AJC Jerusalem. In her work, Doreen is working with the foreign ambassadors to Israel, with ministers, and with members of Knesset on enhancing AJC's mutual interest regarding Israel's diplomatic status and relations with countries around the world. Previous to AJC, Doreen worked at the headquarters of Yesh Atid Party and at the Knesset for MK Dr. Ronen Hoffman. Prior to that, Doreen served as a naval officer for a period of 6 years in the Israeli Navy in the Training and Doctrine Department and the International Planning Department. Doreen graduated with a BA in Government Diplomacy and Strategy, specializing in conflict resolution and political communications from the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya and Sciences Po, Paris. Thanks to all of you who have submitted questions on a range of topics related to Israel and the Middle East prior to today's call. During the call, you may also submit questions by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will read the questions anonymously, so feel free to ask whatever is on your mind. With that, I'll now hand it over to Ali Turkel, Associate Director of Access Global, to moderate today's conversation. Ali?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. And thanks for everyone who is on the Zoom call and our live Facebook feed on the Access page. And especially welcome to Doreen and Yael. We're really excited for today's program. So we're going to jump right in. We have lots to discuss, a lot of really fabulous questions. But before we dive into the questions, I just wanted to give you both a chance to say a few words about the perspective you're bringing to this conversation. And we'll start with Doreen.
Hi, everyone. It's evening now in Tel Aviv. What I'll bring to this conversation, feel free to reach out with questions both right now online and after as well if something comes up. So I'll bring the more Israeli perspective, being here on the ground, working with members of Knesset for the past few years, with ministers, with the government, with the ministries. Walking in the halls, I feel I could bring both answers and clarifications to our process, which is a bit different than the American process, political process. So feel free to ask questions about that. And also if you have any questions regarding the relations of Israel with any other countries, the Jerusalem office is very active with the ambassadors based here, both in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem at the embassies. We meet with them now online, but before the virus, we met with them constantly face to face. Hope we could do that again soon. So if you have any questions about these two issues, about the neighborhood that I live in, feel free to do so.
Great, thank you. And Yael.
So yeah, hi, I wanted to say thank you to Ali and AJC for inviting me to participate. It's a pleasure, both because this is an important week for Israel, and also it's nice to be able to, you know, talk to people while we're in isolation. I'm coming from Brooklyn, New York, so we're still kind of under lockdown, and it's been difficult. So my perspective is I'm an American. I made Aliyah after high school. I lived there for 7 years, doing a range of different things. My focus is on the peace process. I'm currently working on a book with former Ambassador Martin Indyk, which is covering the shuttle diplomacy led by Henry Kissinger following the Yom Kippur War. So that's at the start of the US-led Arab-Israeli peace process. And it has ended, or we don't know where it's going, but that's an issue that I'm working on primarily, and I started working on it when I was in DC. And so I would say my perspective is I spent 5 years in DC and then moved to New York a year ago, and so I'm familiar with the US policy process, specifically on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but also on wider US foreign policy questions with the Middle East, relationships with the Gulf, as well as you know, U.S. Like funding issues with the aid that it gives to different countries. And my parents are also from the Middle East. They're from Lebanon, and so I see myself, you know, kind of as a hybrid Israeli, but also Jewish and an Arab. So that's my perspective.
Amazing. Well, we're honored to have both of you here with us, providing a diverse array of perspectives and expertise. So with that, we're going to kick things off. We have a couple key topics that some of the questions kind of fell into that folks submitted in advance. One being the new coalition government. So we'll start there. We also have some about Israel and the Middle East more broadly. Then we'll dive into Israel and the US. A couple questions on Corona and how that's affecting Israel and its neighbors. And then we have a few other questions at the end in a very different direction. So we'll wait until we get there. So we're going to start with the new coalition government. If you're not paying attention, or I'm sure everyone knows, Israel's had not one, not two, but 3 elections in the past few months, and things are changing very rapidly. So we'd love to hear from you just a bit about maybe that process and the new coalition government that was agreed upon more broadly. So we'll start with Doreen, and then Yael, if you want to respond as well.
Okay, so on the first round of the election, I was actually not living in Israel. I was living in Singapore, and I felt really bad as a political advisor, in my blood, to be away and miss the vote. In Israel, we can't vote from abroad. So little did I know that I'll have 2 other chances to do so. So I'll try to start with that and try to lay the foundation of how the system is different than the US. Firstly, in Israel, our system is parliamentarian, meaning that we choose a list of people and not the prime minister. And that person that is elected and able to build a coalition, I'll explain further on the whole process because it's a bit complicated, is nominating ministers from within his list and his coalition partners to be ministers. What we had in the 4th election is a combination of a few things. The first thing I would say is that the people have had enough. The results as it is haven't shifted too much within the blocks, but going through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and within possible 4th, people felt that they had enough. So with that being said, and it's also important to bear in mind that when you think of how is the Israeli voter votes, it's a bit different than the US voter. Our left and right is more security-wise and not economical. It's more policy-oriented. So basically, we choose on the person that we think could lead this country and the entire surrounding in times of crisis, which we all unfortunately experienced. So this is a new trend that has been on Netanyahu's mind in the past few years of him campaigning. He was able to make the whole system more personal rather than the system of having to voting for a list. He made it more personal. His campaigns were "it's us or them," which made him the ultimate only leader of the Likud party, of the government party. So he took it to a more identity-oriented area. That also came in also a negative way in the past few rounds, when he was indicted and interrogated in the corruption issues. So when people now are more leader-oriented, he has this as a shadow. So we need to keep all these in mind when we try to analyze the Israeli politics from the outside. I'll go back a bit to our system, and feel free to reach out if you have questions on more specific protocol and systematic issues. The ministers that are being nominated are also members of Knesset, meaning that they have a ministerial position, but they also vote. They are one of the 120 members of Knesset that we have here in the parliament. So this is one of the most basic problems that we have, that we don't really have a separation between the legislative branch and the ministerial governmental branch, the more executional branch. But also, if you want, I could take this on later. So I won't get into the position of the president within the political process, but he does have a very crucial role. Again, if you want me to elaborate on this later on, I will. But currently, what I will say about that is what President Rivlin has offered is a paritatic government. I'll explain a little about what that is and what this is actually on the table. What it says is that both parties that are going into, both blocs that are going into the government now, the Likud and Blue and White, are currently, will be the two major blocs that will assemble the government, the next government. But although they're not equal in power, I mean in numbers, they will be equal in the numbers of portfolio and ministries that they will have. So although Gantz will have about 20 members of Knesset that will be sort of his bloc in this coalition, and Netanyahu possibly will have about 50. They will have the same amount of portfolios and positions. So this was Rivlin's, President Rivlin's offer for this government, and it was agreed by both parties, which also were able to reach the agreement between them. So Netanyahu and Gantz were able to sign the agreement. It was on the evening of Yom HaShoah here in Israel that they signed it. And it's important to say that when we're talking about the new government in Israel, there still is no government in Israel. We're still in the process. Netanyahu still has to talk to his bloc partners. He still has to talk with Yamina, with the Naftali Bennett and the Ayelet Shaked. He still has to talk to the ultra-Orthodox. We heard lately that Minister Litzman is willing to give up on the health ministry, and he wants the Ministry of Housing, but that's really specific. So there's still some pieces to the puzzle to take place. But what's important to say is that the agreement here in Israel shows Gantz as not so much the winner, because he wasn't able to reach the most crucial ministerial positions of the government. Although he got, as they agreed, he got the same amount of portfolios, he wasn't able to get the most crucial ones to actually perform legislation and reforms. So Gantz they chose not to use the option of legislating, the option of threatening Netanyahu with legislating the laws against him becoming prime minister. It was sort of his leverage that he could have used, and he chose not to. So right now we have them within the bloc, and this kind of shifts Yamina's and Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked to the side, because Netanyahu doesn't have to have them. So the agreement with them hasn't been signed yet. So we'll have to wait and see how is that. It is important to know that within Gantz's bloc, we have Amir Peretz and Itzik Shmuli from the Labor Party, which has basically collapsed within the last few rounds of elections. We currently have 3 members of the Labor Party, both of them who are inside the coalition, and Merav Michaeli, who chose to stand on her both 2 feet and stay behind in the opposition. So we have them. We have 2 members, Hendel and Hauser, who were part of the original Blue and White, who chose to separate, and they're also are considered to be within Gantz's bloc within the coalition. So I would like to touch another issue that is asking on why did Lapid stay out, right?
I also want to make sure we get a chance for Yael to respond. So,
okay, sure.
Is that okay? Do you want to finish that thought, and then we'll move to Yael, and then
all right.
Okay.
All right. So I'll just, because I just wanted to touch the opposition for a bit. We asked, why did Lapid stay out? This issue is stabilizing him as a more credible person, because he said from the beginning, and also Gantz said, we don't want to sit with Netanyahu. But both Lapid and Bogi and Lieberman, who were already worked with Netanyahu, they know his, let's say, shticks, and they said we're not getting in, we're staying out. And but once that Gantz nominated himself as the Speaker of the Knesset, again, I could elaborate on that again later, that was the end of it. So I have some more thoughts. I'll leave it to later. And that's it for now.
Great. Yael, if you wanted to respond, and then I kind of have a follow-up question for your perspective, what you might, I don't know, guess, or if you have any kind of thoughts on how this unity government or the process has affected or might affect Israel's relationship with diaspora Jewry. So you can respond to anything Doreen said, and if you want to bring that in as well.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to take kind of a more macro perspective to look at where we are sitting now after 3 rounds of elections, with the head of the opposition just having capitulated to Netanyahu. And Gantz's biggest campaign slogan throughout the last 3 rounds of elections was that he wouldn't sit under an indicted prime minister. So what has changed? Why did Gantz decide to do this, which is considered a political bombshell within Israel? And also, what did Netanyahu gain and lose? So quickly, Doreen pointed out some of this, but Gantz, what did he get from this deal? He came to the table with only 17 seats and ended up getting half of the ministerial portfolios. Also in the agreement, I'll just go through just broadly, that each of them have a veto over the other for the main issues. So Netanyahu will be prime minister for 18 months, while Gantz is his deputy, as well as serving as the defense minister. And then after 18 months, Gantz becomes prime minister, and Netanyahu is serving as his deputy. And there'll be some ministerial changes that will happen after Gantz becomes prime minister, but it is still a very big deal, and it's debated in Israel whether this deal is actually going to hold up, in the sense, is Netanyahu going to hand over the reins to Gantz, which people don't really feel like that's, I mean, 60% apparently, according to a poll, feel that that's actually not going to happen. So Gantz is able to, let me start with what Bibi got, because that puts into perspective how Gantz is being viewed. Netanyahu received first and foremost legitimacy from this decision. He's going to be sitting in the defendant's chair starting in the end of May. He was actually already supposed to be facing the charges. The court was already supposed to have started, but because of Corona, they closed the courts. And so he'll be the prime minister while he is sitting in the court defending himself against charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. This gives him legitimacy. That is one of the things that he's searching for the most. And he can come to the court with a fresh mandate saying that I was appointed the new prime minister. The other thing is that he gets the legitimacy to serve as prime minister and to continue to serve in the government even after he has been indicted or any corruption charges are finalized. That means that normally there's a law in the Knesset that says that a member of Knesset who was indicted cannot be part of the government. But according to the coalition, it's stipulated that even after he will still be able to remain the alternate prime minister under these circumstances. The other, I'd say, just really important things that are monumental in terms of Netanyahu's political career and that make this coalition agreement very difficult for many, both on the right and the left, to accept, is that Netanyahu is given veto power over some really crucial appointments that have to do with his political future and the criminal charges against him. The first is who will be the next chief of police, because there's currently an acting chief of police. And then in the next 2 years, there will need to be a new state prosecutor as well as attorney general. So that's crucial because these are the figures that are going to be negotiating a plea deal with him and are intimately connected to his corruption cases. The final issue is on an issue of the Judicial Appointments Committee, so how Supreme Court judges are appointed in Israel. We heard that this was a major sticking point throughout the negotiations in the last round between Netanyahu and Gantz. Quickly, I'll run through that. The justice minister is actually going to be from the Blue and White Party, which is seen as a big win for Blue and White because many of the issues to Israel's democracy and the issues that Likud has been trying to support Netanyahu have been through undermining the judicial and trying to bring more power into the legislature and the executive. And so someone who cares about separation of powers in the judicial system is going to have a lot of power to try to buttress this important aspect of democracy. So his name is Avi Nissenkorn. He used to be, he comes from Histadrut, which is Israel's biggest labor union, and he's seen as like a really strong figure. So the committee that appoints the justices is composed of 9 people. Typically it has 3 Supreme Court justices, 2 from the Israeli Bar Association, 2 ministers from the cabinet. So that's one Nissenkorn, the justice minister, and then another from Likud. as well as 2 members of Knesset, 1 from Likud and usually 1 from the opposition. The reason why this has been so inflammatory is because Gantz gave up the position of the member of Knesset who serves on the committee, who's supposed to be from the opposition, and made it someone whose name is Tzvi Hauser. So he used to be a member of Blue and White. He actually was Netanyahu's cabinet secretary in 2009, and he seemed to be, quite like on the right wing flank. And so that makes, you need a 7 out of 9 majority in order for a justice to be appointed, and that gives the right wing a de facto veto because they have a 3-person block on this committee. So that means that also in the future, the justices who are going to be hearing Netanyahu's appeal case will also be able to be appointed because he'll have a de facto veto. And finally, to your original question, Ali, how does this affect relations with diaspora Jewry? The final and perhaps most frustrating and frightening aspect of the coalition agreement, and also we should say the only policy issue in this, I think it's a 20-page agreement, I don't remember, but the only policy issue that is stipulated in this agreement is the question of annexation. In Hebrew, it's referred to as applying sovereignty. And so according to the agreement, coming on July 1st, Israel can apply sovereignty in the West Bank pending US approval. And so this affects the relationship with diaspora Jewry for just a bombshell. It's going to be a bombshell, and we've already seen some of the repercussions because of the main issue that the elephant in the room is, how does Israel maintain its democracy while asserting control over Palestinians in the West Bank without affording them full civil rights. And then there's also much larger implications where America is getting involved and has to do with the future security of the Middle East, because one of the plans that we assume Netanyahu is going to go forward with is annexation of the Jordan Valley. And the Jordan Valley is a crucial security buffer for Israel, but it also has quite a large number of Palestinians living there, as well as it is viewed as extremely important to Jordan. Netanyahu, by taking this move, is threatening Israel's peace treaty with Jordan. They've threatened to reassess. Already now, the foreign minister has mentioned that they're going to reassess it, as well as it puts the security cooperation that Israel enjoys with the Palestinian Authority in grave jeopardy, because we don't know what's going to happen once the Knesset moves forward with such a deal, because it will erode the already diminishing legitimacy that the PA is trying to hold on to. So I'll stop my remarks there, but we can continue talking about this after.
I'll just add a few small remarks to what Yael thoroughly just explained. The annexation issue is also binded to a vote at the Knesset, which has to have a majority that Netanyahu obviously has, because both Bogi Ya'alon and Lieberman from the opposition will vote pro. So it will, if the vote will take place, I'm sure that he will get the majority.
Great, thank you both for that. I know there were some other questions that popped up. We're gonna, I think, move on to the Israel-US relationship, since that came up, and then we can always circle back to this if more questions arise. So kind of speaking of annexation and the US's role, is there anything that can be realistically done to possibly doom the plan or interrupt the plan for annexation?
So I think that once the agreement is en route and the terms have been set and the terms are achievable, it's probably will happen. We don't know the constellation of it. We don't know what will exactly be annexed. We haven't seen any plan that will actually be taken. But the feeling that I have from this government is that it will be much more subtle than the last government. The fact that we will have blue and white within the coalition, we will have Gantz, we will have Ashkenazi as the foreign minister, probably, it's still not set. It will be a more moderate government than the last government, the last functioning government that we had. So I'm sure that if we spoke about the Israeli diaspora relations, I trust that this blue and white presence within the coalition will be able to more stabilize the relations.
I would say that it's a very complicated matter right now because of the upcoming elections, and no future, I mean, we're using the presumptive nominee, it's going to be Biden, but no future incoming president wants to take on such a contentious issue, in the first few months, less even in the first year of his presidency. Also considering that the US is facing so many other challenges, dealing with the economy post-COVID. So the possibilities of, I still think that the possibilities of a Biden administration issuing well, obviously because we have to split it up. If Trump is going to win again in 2020, then there is really nothing that the US government could do beyond perhaps, because Gabi Ashkenazi and Benny Gantz are going to be in the top two security positions. I mean, Gantz as defense minister and Ashkenazi as foreign minister. They could come to Jared Kushner and give him the stark general's warning, which if you've seen, there's this organization called Commanders for Israel's Security. They came out with a piece, I think yesterday, in Foreign Policy. They have the most illustrious names in the Israeli security establishment. Tamir Pardo, who's the former head of the Mossad, was one of the authors of the article. And so there's kind of a unanimous acceptance within the security establishment that annexation, specifically of the Jordan Valley, is not in Israel's best interests, both security-wise and politically. So I think that Gantz and Ashkenazi could actually use their sway in that regard. And who knows how policy is being made in the White House right now. How much power does the ambassador David Friedman hold versus special advisor Jared Kushner, and everything else that's going on right now. I don't see that America has the bandwidth to take on this type of in the weeds issue. I mean, Pompeo said yesterday in a press briefing, that he's leaving it up to Israel, and the U.S. will consult with Israel on this decision. So yeah, I would say that if there is a Biden administration, though, we could definitely, there could be a lot of pressure that American groups in Washington could put on Biden to try to have him issue a warning. And I would say that this warning should be issued not only, if Netanyahu doesn't decide to annex the Jordan Valley, he could go for something small, something symbolic. That's what some people are saying, something that won't have such dire ramifications for the future of the PA or the Jordan-Israeli peace treaty, like Gush Etzion, known as the settlement block. So these would be parts of Israel anyways if there was going to be a two-state solution. So I think that's dangerous in and of itself because it sets a precedent that then you have the ball rolling. And so in my opinion, I think Biden should, if he comes in, he should look at the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship as the most crucial relationship that the U.S. has in the Middle East and vice versa for Israel, and recognize that this is America's time as Israel's closest ally to make a statement and to try to show Israel that these types of actions are not going to be in its best interest and could perhaps put the alliance in jeopardy down the line.
Another small issue, Ali, that when we're talking about annexation of the Jordan Valley or some portion of it, we should also mention our Israeli relations with Jordan. If Netanyahu will decide to do some move of annexing or sovereignty, however you call it, if he will be able to reach out to King Abdullah and have some kind of mechanism that they will cooperate in and agreed to. I know that Blue and White agreed to do so if they said that if the relations with Jordan will not be harmed. So we need to bear in mind the internal relations between Israel and Jordan when we're talking about it, and not only the Israeli-US relations, because it will be a game changer if we will get the Jordanians into the equation.
Great, and just a note about AJC's kind of stance on settlements and the two-state solution. AJC has long believed that Israeli settlement expansion is inconsistent with the aim of a two-state solution, and we, as advocates, as on behalf of young leadership in AJC, urge Israel's leaders to continually reaffirm the country's commitment to the two-state solution. So just putting that out there. There were some questions in the chat, the Q&A box, so thank you. Moving on from that question, as supporters, this is a question that someone submitted, so I'll take myself out of that. But as supporters of Israel, how do we push back against some of the possible illiberal trends in Israel that may, to some, threaten the future of a democratic state?
I can start with that. So yes, that's a great question. Doreen? Yeah, is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say that's fundamentally important, and I think it's an issue that the American Jewish community is waking up to now, because those of us whose lives and careers are intertwined with Israel, I think that we celebrate and embrace the shared democratic values. And that's that's the bedrock of the alliance, which is both openness, pluralism, welcoming immigrants and refugees. And polls have shown that traditionally Americans do see these shared values as the foundation for the strong relationship between these two countries, both at the governmental level and beyond. I think that the best way for American Jews to do this is to try to strengthen civil society in Israel. This also doesn't get enough focus. When we think of the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab sectors of society, these constituencies, they look different on the outside, but they're actually both dealing with very similar issues when it comes to socioeconomic needs, whether it's increasing participation in the workforce, violence against women, equal municipal funding. And I think part of Israel's beauty, in my view, is the diversity of its society. And democracy flourishes when, all constituents of society, their voices are heard and they're being represented. And I think one of the fears that I have been feeling, as well as I'm sure this is shared with other Americans, is the illiberal trend that is taking on an exclusionary tone. So Likud and some other members of the coalition feel that some members of society in Israel should be excluded, whether it's their voices don't count in politics, like Netanyahu has made references against the Arab parties that their voices shouldn't be counted, or whether they're not, like Lieberman thinks that they need to take an oath, validating their support for Israel, as well as just other minor discrimination that happens against the Ethiopian community we've seen, as well as African immigrants. I mean, these issues, they're eroding the foundations of Israel's democracy, because pluralism is something that's so important. I'm not even talking about the more substantive issues of Israeli democracy. That's like, you know, the separation of powers, as I mentioned before, how the judicial system functions, respect for the gatekeepers. So that's, you know, the attorney general, the state prosecutor. These have come under threat. It's more difficult for Americans to, you know, to have their voices heard in these issues because Americans don't vote in Israel. So I would say that using civil society as a good metric of, you know, looking at how strong Israeli democracy is. That's why I actually think Israeli democracy is flourishing, because if you look at the civil society organizations, and also the not only, you know, independent within their own, you know, within the Arab sector or within the, you know, secular or Haredi sector, but there are cross-cutting alliances that are happening between different groups. Gender-based violence is a great example. Israel has increasing rates of domestic violence, which leads to, you know, sadly, many women losing their lives each year. And 50% of these of this violence is happening against women from the Arab sector in Israel. And so the Arab feminist organizations have partnered with Jewish feminist organizations in order to try to lobby the government to, you know, address this by issuing the appropriate funds and dedicating a task force to deal with this issue, because it's really inappropriate that in a country, you know, so small that there can be, you know, upwards of 50 women being killed by their husbands each year. And this is just a small example. There's other cross-cutting alliances that happen in terms of issues of personal status. So that's like the rabbinate's control over, you know, marriages, abortions, divorces, as well as for LGBTQ issues. So I think that's crucial. My last sticking point would be when we look at the future of the left in Israel, which Doreen mentioned, that labor has kind of come to the end of its road, we think, maybe, with Amir Peretz and Itzik Shmuli, the two labor leaders, joining Netanyahu's government, and just the declining percentages of votes that they're getting. We saw in the last election, it was their lowest turnout. So the left needs to revitalize itself. I think that one way that American Jews could try to help this would be to maybe take a serious look at how Arab-Jewish political partnership would look like. There's a lot of Israelis on the left that feel, both Jewish and Arab, that the future of Israel's democracy is really reliant on having Arabs be full political participants in the system, which actually in this last election, it was quite historic. The Arab joint list received 15 seats, which is its largest achievement to date, as well as the fact that they said that they would support Gantz, they would endorse him. So that's historic, not only because Gantz is a former chief of staff of the IDF, but also because there's a pragmatism not only within the Arab leadership, but also within the Israeli Arab constituency, that they want to be full members of Israel, you know, of Israeli society, and they don't feel like they're, you know, so torn in between their Palestinian identity versus their Israeli identity, but they see them meshed together and would like to have that expressed and be seen both in politics. So I think that we'll be seeing, you know, Jewish and Arab progressive leaders working to find compromises on their political platforms to forge kind of a new progressive Zionism. And that would be, you know, that's going to be something to look out for.
So I'll take it from where Yael left it. What we saw in the last round of election within the Arab society is indeed a very high turnout. What we also saw is the Arab society voting not only for the Arab list. They vote for Meretz, they vote for blue and white, some vote for Likud. Some Israeli Arabs that here in AJC Jerusalem we're in touch with are loving the country. They are endorsing the Hatikva. They are endorsing the flag. So the high turnout that we saw within the Joint Arab List does not show the entire voting percentage that we saw within the society. But to your question, Ali, that was a while back ago, about the democratic character of Israel. There are a lot of, let's say, not positive things about Gantz's entrance to the government. But one thing that I will say is that on these issues of keeping Israel democratic, his line of in the government will be keeping a status quo and not having a possibility of harming it. His grasp within the committee to appoint judges and in the ministerial committee and in other key ministries will help achieving the status quo and not following, as you said, the trends that are trying to harm the democratic value and character of the Israeli state.
Thank you so much for those perspectives. We had so many questions come in and so many more on the list, but we are short on time. So I'm going to ask one last question that's a bit different, a bit out of the box, and then we'll turn it over to Jeffrey for some closing remarks. So I personally have not watched this show, so I have nothing to say, but I'm hoping you two do. Do you watch Fauda? And if so, what's your take on the accuracy of the show or any thoughts or reflections? It seems like everyone's watching it but me. I'm going to add it to my watch list.
Of course, I watch it. You should, Ali. Not only do I watch it, I can't stop watching it. Actually, a fun fact, the set of Fauda is filmed in an Arab village next to the directors of AJC Jerusalem's home. So every time they film it, she has a lot going on. It does, knowing some, let's say, actual Fauda people, if you can call it, I mean, people that do what they do. Of course, the show is a show, so you'll have to make it more appealing to the storyline, to the public. But it has a lot of reality in it. There's some of the stories, some of the ways that the Israelis are functioning within the West Bank. So I would say that Hollywood has some effect on the show, but there are facts to it. What we have seen within the coronavirus days is a rise of views of Fauda in Arab states. So they revealed it and they watch it. Some got criticized because it's an Israeli show and what are you doing watching an Israeli show? But it creates a bridge that shows both sides. Both the Israelis could see what is portrayed as the Arab, the Palestinians in the show. But it does show both sides, the other side, which sometimes, as you know, having like a blank space of the enemy, so-called, or the other side, could harm the relation. So in that aspect, it does well.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly say, because I know we're coming on to the end. So I enjoyed the first season of Fauda. I think that it definitely was filling a gap within the Israeli cultural view of how it dealt with the Palestinian issue, like from the security perspective, by showing the impact of Israel's occupation in the West Bank on normal Palestinian lives. I think, unfortunately, since the first season, I'm just finishing up the third season now. I think that it is moved into the stereotypical, which makes me a bit sad because you don't see as much dynamism in the characters as you did previously. They're all either collaborators or terrorists. And the human side of the drama, the human side, which I think is the most interesting and compelling at the end of the day in terms of you know, what we're getting out of this show. They do a good job of portraying that, but unfortunately it's only through the security lens. And I understand that's, you know, that's the context. But in my idealism, I would like to see a show that finds a way to connect Israelis and Palestinians that moves beyond the parameters of, you know, the binary of like the enemy versus, you know, the security agent. And also beyond just the usual tropes of, you know, the Shabak versus terrorists. I just, in my own just idea, I think maybe something historical could be interesting to show when there were relationships between Jews and Arabs that were more nuanced and complex and had, you know, each side kind of being viewed on an equal footing, both in the sense of, you know, maybe we have to take the conflict away because the conflict's asymmetry makes it so difficult to portray Palestinians, you know, without the conflict or without the weight of terror. But if we use the Ottoman Empire as an example, there were relationships between Jews and Arabs, both Jews that were local Jews living in the Middle East, like in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Egypt, and their relationships with their local Arab neighbors were much more, you know, much more complex. And I think that they blur the distinctions that we have now, which are the distinctions I think that are kind of too apparent in Fauda. I would just, you know, love to have a time when I imagine that the binaries that are portrayed are no longer relevant, both for Israeli society and Palestinian society. So yeah, thanks.
Well, I'm sufficiently intrigued, and finishing Ozark right now, but I'm going to add this to my list. I just want to thank you both for your time across different time zones and continents. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate having diverse voices on a range of issues. I wish we could have gotten to much more, but I really, I learned a lot and I appreciated hearing from both of you. So thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it to Jeffrey to close us out.
Thanks, Ali. And thank you, Yael and Doreen, for joining us today and diving into some of our burning questions about Israel and the Middle East. It was a really fantastic conversation. Thanks again. And we hope that you'll join us at some of our upcoming remote access events. Next week on May 6th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a really interesting program titled The Significance of Sport in Diplomacy. We'll be joined by Marty Conway, Professor of Global Business of Sport at Georgetown University, and Trina Bolton, Program Officer in the U.S. Department of State's Sports Diplomacy Division of the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. They're going to lead us in a session on the influence of sport as a means to diplomacy. After that, in 2 weeks, on May 14th at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we're going to have another interesting program titled Culinary Diplomacy, Borderless Wine. Access San Francisco leader Peter Weltman is the founder of Borderless Wine. It's a company that seeks to utilize wine as a form of soft diplomacy to tell new narratives, facilitate cross-border initiatives, and encourage interesting dialogue. I want to again thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Yael and Doreen. Thanks, Jeffrey.